In this episode of 5 Minutes of Cloud, we're going to continue our conversation around the National Institutes of Standards and Technology cloud model. We're going to talk about the service description models. So these are things like software as a service or platform as a service. As a part of the NIST model, the National Institute for Standards and Technology model for cloud computing, one of the three main domains was this concept of the service models for computing. So we talked about the essential characteristics in another episode where we talked about the on-demand self-service aspects and characteristics. When we look at those characteristics, we start thinking, what kinds of services can we build? In order to provide some consistency in description, the NIST folks that wrote this document came up with three different components. They said, hey, there's the basic concept of the infrastructure services. What people in IT at least are usually thinking about, I need to get computers or virtualized computers to my end users. How can I do that more efficiently? And so we start with the concept of infrastructure as a service. On top of that, then there's the concept of platform as a service, which rather than thinking of the individual components, I start thinking about the services that are being rendered by my compute infrastructure, things like database services or web server services, and actually presenting those as resources that can be consumed in a cloud fashion. And maybe the one that is maybe the most confusing, but also the most consumed resource is the software as a service offering. Software as a service, I say it's confusing because there is a little bit of a gray area between software as a service and the platform as a service world. And this is something that may have only really started to come to the forefront over the last number of years as more software applications, things like messaging applications. A really popular one today is the Slack messaging application. This is an application that people use for effectively instant messaging purposes. I'm going to send a note, somebody else is going to see it and respond, but I also have a history of the messages, so there's some additional value there. But people are starting to integrate Slack as a part of a messaging chain that isn't necessarily exclusively for end user consumption. It's almost becoming a part of the machine consumption process where the Slack application, which you could have easily said is just a software application, it's on demand, I can add users to it so I can add or remove resources from it, but it's now becoming part of this concept of a platform. So software as a service, you could say, is very straightforward. It's an end-to-end software package provided in the as-a-service model, in the cloud model. So elastic, on-demand, metered, based against some kind of pooled resources. You could have more users, more channels. Those are the resources in the Slack model. But then I get into the platform space. And in the platform space, I start looking at the resources that I would use to build an application more than the application itself. So things like database. Now, a database is an application. And so you could say, well, if I have database as a service, that's software as a service. The database is the software. But really, the database as a service aspect of the platform is a piece of what I'm using to build my application, build the thing that the end users are going to consume, whether it be in a cloud fashion, an on-demand cloud fashion, or just as a point application that doesn't have that same elasticity. It's provisioned and it's on and it's never going to be turned off or released. I might want to build that up of a number of different components, including things like web services to actually manage the interaction from either end users on web interfaces or potentially even applications that are talking over a web interface into my application space. The database concept, the messaging bus, so having lots of little application components talking across a message bus is a very common component. These are all services that are often part of a platform service. And even in the network space, we start to see platform-like services. Things like load balancing becomes a platform service rather than just a network infrastructure component. And that leads us back then down to the very base components. Again, the things that I think most people are very comfortable with, at least most IT professionals are very comfortable with when we talk about cloud, things like compute as a service, network as a service, storage as a service. These often map in an almost one-to-one fashion either to a physical resource or a first pass virtualization, so first level of abstraction virtualization. So a virtual computer where I might have 4 things that look equivalent to any other computer on one actual physical box, or 40 or 400. The same thing is true for storage and network. Now, in storage, I might have a backup service that might be considered part of infrastructure or could be considered part of the platform, right? So even here, there's a little bit of a gray area, but usually if we're talking about the core infrastructure, we're talking about those core infrastructure components that most people think of in a data center as infrastructure. When we talk about platform, we're talking about that first level of abstraction. I'm no longer thinking about the server that's running my web server. I'm just thinking about the fact that there is an application that is serving my own personal applications, deployment services via a web interface. And that's sort of the delta there. And then, of course, you get back to the software services model where you have the end-to-end package, but again, with some kind of dynamic add, remove kind of capability to it that enables the cloud model with that. So again, this has been a description of the NIST services model. Thanks for watching. This was Robert Starmer bringing you 5 Minutes of Cloud. 5 Minutes of Cloud is brought to you by Kumulus Technologies, the company I actually work for, and we really appreciate the fact that you actually attended and watched this little segment. We obviously have a YouTube channel here, so please subscribe to that. We have Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. Yeah, I do actually find some interesting things to say on Twitter once in a while. And on top of that, we have a mailing list. If you subscribe to the mailing list, we have a free report, basically 5 pitfalls of cloud that you can avoid if you get my report. So why don't you hop on over to our website, sign up for the mailing list. You'll get that report delivered to your inbox shortly after signing up. And I think that's also another very interesting and important read. Thanks so much again for watching.